Mr. President and members. A fine point on the language in the House chamber. A young legislator was once asked, you understand that those words are blasphemy. The voice, it's bad Latin to start with, but anyway, the voice of God is the voice of God. The voice of the people is the voice of the people, and don't mistake the two of them. But today I want to speak about process, the way in which we make law, and the conversations that we have in this chamber among our members as we do that. Voting, we all know and celebrate, is a right, a duty, and a privilege, but mostly a right, which has Senator Chamberlain did, but certainly Senator Newman pointed out, it's not a requirement. The framers left it to the states in the main, and through the amendment process that Senator Swedzinski spoke so eloquently about, left it to the states to administer and conduct elections. Occasionally themselves at the federal level passing laws, in particular in the 60s, the Voting Rights Act, to ensure that all who were citizens of a certain age with a couple of other requirements were not going to be denied the opportunity to vote and to register, and maybe not in that particular law, but having established prior to that, they weren't going to have to pay to do it, which was perhaps the most disenfranchising law on the books, particularly in a number of southern states, to keep black people and poor whites from voting. Today in the Star Tribune, Virginia Heffernan, a writer that I'm fond of, talked about the chief problem with democracy is that it takes too long to get to consensus. We talk and we talk and we talk, and we don't reach consensus. We sometimes reach compromises, but there's a big difference between consensus and compromise. Consensus is only a noun. It also has a Latin derivation, a derivative, and it means feeling together, coming together, knowing together. It's only a noun. You can't use the word consensus as a verb. Consensus is a common agreement that's arrived at through understanding interests of the negotiators and not just arguing positions on policy, which in and of themselves frequently lead to failure even when a common good and goal is prized. The other word, compromise, is both a passive verb as well as a noun, and for many it has a negative connotation that somehow, if you reach a compromise, you have abandoned your principles. Minnesotans have already spoken on voter ID. Governor Dayton vetoed Senator Newman's bill, and then the voters spoke for themselves and they rejected it. I've worked on election legislation for many years, sometimes successfully, often not, including ranked choice voting, no excuse absentee voting, as opposed to early voting, national popular vote, moving our primary, and a variety of administrative reforms. In 2010, when in the House, we couldn't reach consensus, and I went over to the House chamber, which I don't do so frequently anymore, and approached Representative Tom Emmer. And I touched him on the shoulder, and he turned around and said, "Who are you?" If you know Tom Emmer, that was pretty typical of him. And I said, "Well, I'm Ann Rest. I'm over in the Senate, and I wonder if during the interim you'd like to talk about changes in our election administration." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, maybe." And that became the start of a conversation between a Democrat and a Republican, where the leadership in the body was also divided, and the governor was a Democrat. And we worked all summer, and we didn't talk to politicians. We talked to election officials out in the fields. We talked with the election judges. What can we do in Minnesota to improve, streamline, make the system fairer? And by the end of that summer and into the fall, Representative Emmer and I, agreed with these election officials, and we put together a bill. We brought it back to the legislature in that following year, and it passed. And we had been told and had a principle of dealing with election law that in order for a governor to accept it, because it could so easily be changed with a difference in the majority parties, that it had to be supported by a bipartisan majority, and it was. Then in 2016, following the precinct caucuses, which were chaotic in both parties, I worked immediately with a Republican, Representative Sanders. Kurt Daudt was the Speaker of the House, to change Minnesota into a presidential primary state. Co-authors in the Senate were both David Hann and Tom Bach, and in the House for Representative Sanders, he was an assistant majority leader. One of his co-authors was now Speaker Melissa Hortman. The Republican Party, the Democratic Party, both publicly supported that legislation. It was not unanimous. There were members in both parties and in both houses that either thought it went too far, or didn't do this, or it didn't do that. But the consensus that those of us that were making the case was adopted, and we successfully conducted a presidential primary in 2020, and I believe that it is going to stay in place. So what's the point of those two stories? The point is we need to listen to one another more. We need to listen to people outside of this chamber and not come to the chamber with bills that have a preconceived, anointed conclusion that somehow only one group of ideas, only one group of people know what's best. So I challenge us, I'm going to be voting no, but I challenge us to return to a process of working together, to return to a process of attempting to reach consensus, and to pay attention to the people of Minnesota who have already spoken on such an important issue in our democracy. Thank you very much, Mr. President.